Did you know that some of the most powerful spiritual groups in history did not become powerful only because of their teachings, but because they fed something invisible around them? Something built through symbols, repeated intention, shared emotion, ritual, and belief. That is where the mystery of the egregore begins. And once you understand it, you start to see that this idea does not belong only to occult orders, temples, or magicians. It may explain why certain places feel alive, why some groups elevate people while others consume them, and why spiritual work done together can become far stronger than the sum of its parts. If you stay until the end of this video, you will not only understand what an egregore is, but also why this concept has been preserved across initiatory traditions, why it matters in magic, and what it reveals about the forces human beings are feeding every single day without even noticing. The word egregore is usually traced back to the Greek term egregoroi, which is often translated as watchers, a word that appears in ancient apocalyptic literature, especially in the Book of Enoch. In that older context, the meaning is not exactly the same as what occultists later meant by egregore, but the symbolic seed is already there. It is a link between collective spiritual forces, unseen intelligences, and the idea that something can hover over humanity, observe it, influence it, or become entangled with it. Over time, especially in Western esotericism, the term evolved. It came to describe a psychic or subtle collective formation created and sustained by the focused energy of a group. In simple language, an egregore is a living field generated by many minds, emotions, rituals, and symbols all converging around the same center. In deeper esoteric language, it is more than just a metaphor. It is a structure in the subtle world, organized by repetition and fed by participation. This is exactly why the concept is so important. An egregore helps explain why a spiritual current can remain powerful long after its founders are gone. It helps explain why a temple may feel entirely different from an ordinary room, why a sacred name repeated for generations seems to carry actual weight, and why initiation in many traditions is not merely educational, but incorporative. The initiate is not just learning ideas. The initiate is entering a current, and that current, in many schools, is understood as completely real. Some interpret it psychologically, as a collective mind and emotional conditioning. Others interpret it metaphysically, as a genuine, subtle organism. Many experienced occultists hold both views at once, because the psychological and the magical are not always separate in esoteric practice. In my view, one of the biggest mistakes people make is reducing the egregore to just energy, because that vague language hides the true precision of the concept. An egregore is shaped by form, narrative, symbol, attention, memory, and directed will. It has structure, not just intensity. Long before the modern occult world used this word, many ancient peoples already worked with realities that strongly resemble it. In pagan cultures, communities did not only worship gods as isolated individuals. They maintained cults through festivals, songs, sacrifices, seasonal rites, sacred fires, oaths, processions, temple architecture, and repeated stories. Over time, this creates continuity, and continuity creates presence. The Romans spoke of genius loci, the spirit of a place. Many tribal traditions recognize the spirit of the clan, the ancestors of the people, or the living force bound to a sanctuary. In the mystery traditions of the ancient world, the temple was not merely a decorative space. It was a vessel of transmission. If 100 generations approach the same symbol with reverence, fear, longing, devotion, and disciplined imagination, something accumulates. Whether one calls that accumulation a sacred atmosphere, a spiritual current, or an egregore, the underlying principle is remarkably similar. This is where the philosophy behind the egregore becomes even more profound. In the perennial understanding shared across many esoteric systems, human consciousness is not sealed inside the skull. Thought is formative. Symbol is operative. Ritual is not just theater, it is a technology of alignment. In Hermetic terms, the visible and invisible mirror one another. In Kabbalistic language, form, intention, and divine names organize levels of reality. In theosophical and occult language, mental and astral substance can be shaped and energized. So when many individuals contemplate the same image, speak the same words, perform the same ritual gestures, and direct emotional force toward the same spiritual center, they are not merely participating in a social event. They are constructing and sustaining a shared, subtle reality. That is one of the deepest reasons the egregore matters. It reveals that collective consciousness can become architectonic. It can build. By the 19th and 20th centuries, this idea became more clearly articulated in modern Western occultism. Authors such as Eliphas Levi helped shape the atmosphere in which these ideas became intelligible, especially through notions like the astral light and the formative power of imagination. Papus and the French occult milieu helped transmit the language of collective spiritual currents in more initiatory contexts. Stanislas de Guaita contributed to an environment in which symbolism, magical fraternity, and invisible influence were treated with great seriousness. Later, Dion Fortune became especially helpful for understanding this territory, even when the exact vocabulary shifted. Her writings on the group mind, magical contact, inner plane work, and the force generated by coordinated spiritual activity illuminate the mechanics of what many would call an egregore. She understood something essential. When people gather around a real spiritual aim with disciplined intention, they do not only strengthen each other psychologically, they also generate a field that can outlast individual moods and personalities. And this leads directly to magic. In practical magic, an egregore can act like a reservoir, a circuit, or a spiritual infrastructure. A solitary ritual may be meaningful and effective, but a ritual performed within an established current often has greater coherence and force, because it is not starting from absolutely nothing. It plugs into accumulated symbols, prior intentions, repeated consecrations, and a body of living associations. This is one reason serious initiatory traditions care so much about exact forms, sacred words, ritual timing, signs, vestments, geometries, and temple space. To the outsider, these things may appear theatrical. To the magician, they help stabilize contact with a current that has been fed over time. The egregore becomes the medium, through which the work is intensified. A well-formed current can focus aspiration, clarify inner perception, support concentration, and amplify intention. But it can also distort, seduce, and overpower those who surrender their discernment. That is exactly why secret societies, initiatory orders, and esoteric fraternities have always treated this kind of knowledge with extreme caution. In many of these traditions, the temple is far more than a meeting place. The chain of initiation is more than just history. The symbols are more than decoration. The vows are more than basic moral commitments. Together, these elements generate a continuous force. The initiate is gradually aligned with that force, and through repeated participation, begins to resonate with the inner body of the order. Different traditions describe this differently. Esoteric Masonry, Rosicrucian currents, Martinism, ceremonial schools descending from magical orders, and certain thelemic frameworks do not always use identical language or metaphysics. But many share the recognition that a body of symbols, rites, and disciplined intention can become a real current that shapes the consciousness of its members. This is often one of the hidden dimensions of initiation. You do not just receive information, you are received by a field. Experienced practitioners apply this knowledge in very concrete ways. Before entering a ritual, they may deliberately attune themselves to the current of the tradition they serve. They understand why group meditation can carry people deeper than scattered individual effort. They recognize that some sacred spaces feel charged because they have been prayed in, invoked in, and consecrated repeatedly over many years. They are also highly careful about whom they work with, because every group feeds something. A disciplined circle devoted to truth, purification, and reverence creates one kind of atmosphere. A chaotic circle driven by vanity, fear, obsession, or manipulation creates another. When I first understood this principle deeply, what struck me was how practical it really is. It is not just about ceremonial chambers or hidden orders. It explains everyday life. Families have egregoric patterns, communities have them. Online movements build them at astonishing speeds. Even a workplace can generate a field of anxiety or excellence that shapes everyone inside it. And this is where discernment becomes absolutely indispensable. Not every powerful egregore is a noble one. A field can be intense and still be spiritually toxic. A group may feel magnetic not because it is wise, but because it is emotionally contagious. This is why mature occultism must distinguish communion from psychic infection, tradition from dogma, and initiation from dependency. A healthy egregore should elevate clarity, responsibility, inner transformation, and service. An unhealthy one feeds fanaticism, cultish behavior, glamour, and the surrender of judgment. This matters because some seekers, especially in the beginning, confuse intensity with truth. But intensity can come from fear, projection, and obsession just as much as from illumination. In my opinion, this is one of the most important lessons hidden inside the doctrine of the egregore. It teaches that invisible influence is real, but it also demands that you become morally and spiritually intelligent about what you join, what you repeat, and what you energize. There is also a broader philosophical lesson here. The egregore suggests that human beings are never entirely isolated in consciousness. We participate in shared structures of meaning. We inherit worlds made of memory and symbol. We are shaped by currents that existed long before us, and through our attention, we either strengthen or weaken them. From a perennial perspective, this is not merely sociology. It is active participation in a layered reality. The old pagan understood that a sanctuary could be inhabited by a living presence. The sea magician understands that repeated will can organize subtle substance. The mystic understands that prayer joined in harmony has greater force than prayer fragmented by division. Even certain forms of esoteric Christianity hint at something similar when they speak of the living body formed by united intention, sacrifice, and communion. Different traditions use different words, but the principle appears again and again. What is shared inwardly can become real outwardly, and what is sustained outwardly can shape the inner world in return. Now think about the modern world. Today, egregores are not formed only in lodges, temples, or sacred groves. They are formed on social media, in ideological tribes, in fan communities, around political symbols, in brands, movements, and digital identities. The mechanism is entirely familiar. Repetition, symbol, emotional charge, belonging, language, and constant reinforcement. Of course, not every group phenomenon should be labeled an egregore in the strict occult sense, but the structural resemblance is simply too strong to ignore. We live in an age of mass psychic architecture. People are feeding currents every single day with attention, outrage, devotion, fear, and desire. And most of them do not even realize they are participating in acts of collective magical formation, even if they would never ever use that language. So the real question is not only whether egregores exist. The deeper question is this: what kind of egregore are you? Feeding with your life? What symbols do you return to every day? What words are shaping your imagination? What group atmosphere are you allowing to inhabit your mind? And here I want to ask you something for the comments, because this reveals a lot more than people think. Have you ever walked into a place, a temple, a church, a circle, a home, or even an online community, and immediately felt that it carried a presence, as if something had already been built there before you arrived? Tell me about it in the comments, because this is exactly where abstract theory becomes direct experience. The mystery of the egregore is that it stands right at the crossroads of psychology, spirituality, ritual, symbolism, and power. It explains why traditions survive, why sacred forms matter, why group work can transform consciousness, and why discernment is just as necessary as devotion. It also explains why initiates protect lineages, why temples are consecrated, why ritual repetition is never treated casually, and why the invisible atmosphere around a group can be just as important as its public doctrine. Once you understand that, the subject stops being exotic and becomes deeply intimate. You realize that every human being is already participating in collective fields, whether consciously or unconsciously. And that brings us right back to the beginning. The hidden power of great spiritual groups was never only in what they taught, but in what they built together and kept alive across time. That is the deeper meaning of the egregore. It is the invisible body of a current. It can guard, strengthen, illuminate, deceive, protect, and demand. It can become a vessel for genuine spiritual ascent, or a prison made of repeated thought and borrowed emotion. The difference lies entirely in consciousness, intention, integrity, and alignment with truth. So before this video ends, leave one more reflection in the comments. What kind of invisible field do you think your daily habits, beliefs, and loyalties are feeding right now? Because once you truly understand the egregore, you can no longer live as if attention were neutral. Attention is participation. Participation is nourishment. And what we nourish eventually begins to shape us back.